Hi, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Abhijit Bhaduri. I work as a leadership and talent coach, and I'm the author of a book called Dreamers and Unicorns. But today, I have for you a person who's a little hard to describe in one single sentence. I mean, typically, what I do is I say, today my guest is an entrepreneur. Today my guest is a VC. Today my guest is this. Now, the person I have on screen with me is really hard to describe because if I were to think about it, he's done radio, then he's done television, then he's done stage. He's acted in movies in Bollywood. Then he went on to Hollywood. Then he went on to Italy, did a series which was a runaway hit. And now, if there was one thing where I think I had a little bit of an edge, which was writing a book, he's written a book as well. So, without any further ado, I want to welcome Kabir Bedi to the studio today. Thank you so much. What a delight to have you here. Kabir, how do you introduce yourself? I mean, I just really don't know how to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Abhijit, for that very wonderful introduction. How do I describe myself? Well, having written a book on my life, I'd say I'm a guy who's led a tumultuous life and lived to tell the tale. It's been a hell of a journey, and I have grown through it. I've learned through it. I've experienced a lot. I've shared a lot. I've suffered a lot. I've had enormous triumphs and tragedies. So how do you describe a life well lived or a life fully lived with all the complexities of samsara existence?
I want to, start when I read your book. One of the things that struck me was, and which I wasn't aware, was that maybe, you should have put a little more time talking about your work on stage, on the radio. Of course, there is a phenomenal episode of how you interviewed the Beatles on that. I mean,
Right.
was it? What did it feel like when you came face to face with, clearly they were everybody's hero. The Beatles, were huge. And what did it mean to sit across the sofa, talk to them, and what was it like?
It was like being in Alice in Wonderland. It was, I was walking on air because, I used to freelance with All India Radio in Delhi as a way of paying for my college fees. The family didn't have a lot of money, so I had to work my way through college. And I was a crazy Beatles fan. And when the Beatles came into town on a stopover, I said, I'm going to get to them. And I went to my bosses and I said, please allow me to interview the Beatles. They laughed at me. They said, the whole town is trying to get there. What are you going to do? I said, give me a tape recorder. Let's see what I can do. So I got this tape recorder. I went there. And while the whole Delhi press corps was looking for the Beatles, I hunted down their manager, Brian Epstein. And how I conned him into letting me interview them is a story worthy of telling, which I've told in the book. I don't want to get into too many details right now, but basically I pressured him saying it's a government request. And eventually he wanted to do it first, but when I reached him, he couldn't do it. And he walked me across to the Beatles suite and said, boys, do me a favor, give this chap an interview. And there I was in with the Beatles, with the four gods that I worshipped. And, for a moment, I almost forgot all the questions I wanted to ask them. It was just surreal. It was absolutely the stuff that dreams are made of for a cub reporter who was a crazy fan of the Beatles. And I had a wonderful conversation with them, which again I have reported in the book and touched on some pretty dodgy issues as well, including the use of drugs. And that interview was important to me for two reasons. One is I met the Beatles, but more importantly, it was a transformative moment in my life because the way All India Radio treated that interview and eventually even taped over that interview because they said, we don't have money for tapes, we have to use it for other programs, disillusioned me to such an extent that I said, I've come to the end of this road. I've got to move on. I'm leaving. And I left Delhi and I came to Mumbai to become a director. And joined advertising, worked in advertising for 5 years, went onto the stage, joined Bollywood, from Bollywood onto Italy, and from there onto Hollywood. So that transformative moment was the interview with the Beatles. And I always say that, life is very strange. The smallest choices that you make can have far-reaching consequences. Whether you turn left at a road and meet somebody who gives you the job of your lifetime, or you turn right at that road and be run over by a car, you don't know what each road may lead to. And every single decision you take along the way is something that affects you deeply, far more deeply than we realize at the time. You think it's just a casual thing, turn left or right. It can change your life. So the important thing there is to be able to recognize opportunity, know why you're making that left or right turn, and hopefully, if you're doing it for the right reasons, it'll pan out for the best of your development as a person and as a professional.
Fantastic. I when I read your book, the book is Stories I Must Tell. It's right there behind me, as you can see. And one thing I felt was
not to put a fine point on it. There's the book. Right.
That's the book. That's the book.
Yeah.
Kabir, I must tell you that my first impression of you was listening to the song Luminato at the Red Fort in Delhi. So where you have the backdrop of the Red Fort, you're sitting there, and you actually have a fabulous, fabulous, fabulous narration. And I know that you were part of it, and I said, "Wow, who's got that voice?" And then, of course, and here I am talking to this man, and there are people right now who are, the listeners who are saying, "I wish I had that voice." So, really, was that fun to do? I mean, the song Lumia at Red Fort. How old were you?
I have done a lot of Sonny Lumias, and in fact, I did the voice of Shah Jahan when they first did the Sonny Lumia at the Red Fort. Then when they revised it and they reworked it and I had to the show, then I did that again. But I've had this strange relationship with Shah Jahan, because not only have I done him in a Sonny Lumia in the Red Fort, I have played him in the film by Akbar Khan called Taj Mahal, An Eternal Story, and I played him on stage at the Luminato Festival in Canada, which is the most prestigious arts festival in North America. So this relationship with Shah Jahan is inexplicable, but has been there with me. And I grew up in Delhi, so I was surrounded by these incredible creations of his, the Jama Masjid, the Red Fort, and Shah Jahan was always in my consciousness. So there's some kind of relationship, which I can't put my finger on, that exists from that time till now, that has been very much part of my life at many important junctures.
You talk about getting starstruck by the Beatles. And how old were you when you first met the Beatles?
20, all of 20 years old.
Okay, all right.
20 years old.
And today, when you see a starstruck 20-year-old coming out and sort of getting tongue-tied, talking to you, what is your reaction? How do you sort of respond to that?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with being starstruck. It's nice to be starstruck, to look up to somebody, to look up to people who've taken you into an experience that thrilled you, that gave you memories to remember. When I did the role of Sandokan in Italy and got the incredible acclaim that made me a star across Europe, I realized that the role I had done had touched millions of people's lives in some profound ways. And I can't take the whole credit for that. I was the actor, but somebody wrote that score, somebody wrote that story, somebody wrote the screenplay, all of which conspired to become a huge hit. And I happened to be getting all the glory because I played the iconic character of Sandokan. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being starstruck. I think it's wonderful because it touches people. You know, there's one very funny thing I noticed, that even though I may not be the biggest star in India, but when people meet you at an airport and they come up to you, it's not just you they're coming up to. You represent, or I represent to them at that moment, Bollywood. And Bollywood is what has excited their lives, given them dreams, given them moments of wonder. And by coming to me and shake my hand, they're touching a piece of Bollywood. It's not just me. I wish I could take all the credit, but it's the institution that I come from, or that I began my career with, that actually creates that sense of wonder and them being starstruck.
I want to sort of rewind a little bit and talk about your parents. Your parents were unique in many ways, and what I thought was that the narrative which is there in the book, which I was very fascinated by, was you almost had a parallel track through a number of milestone events in India's history. I mean, they certainly had a part. What struck me as interesting was, your father met your mother in Oxford. They were, and she was British, and it must have sort of caused a lot of angst out there, because it wasn't the most common thing for an Indian man to marry. So talk to me about the fact that your family had a very close tie with politics. Multiple figures, Mahatma Gandhi and all that is mentioned so beautifully in your book. I really enjoyed that. But what did it mean to have parents who were like that? Talk to me about that.
You know, above all, my parents were idealists. Now, picture this. There's an Indian man and an English girl who meet in Oxford. They are united in their idealism, the idealism of the times, which was inspired by Gandhi and Tagore and professors like Harold Lasky, that talked about the betterment of others, the importance of uplifting the less fortunate, etc., and felt they were committed to India's independence. So, coming back to India as Oxford graduates, they could have got the best jobs in India, any job they wanted with those qualifications. Yet they sacrificed it all to fight for the freedom of the country. Now, those are different times. And it was a time of idealism, not just on the part of my parents, but many people across the country. And they were idealists with no money. So the huts that we lived in Lahore literally were huts on the outskirts of Lahore, 3 of them, with no electricity, no running water, where all these leftists and communists would gather, people that became very famous later, like Har Krishan Singh Surjit, Gyani Zail Singh, who became president, Inder Gujral, who became prime minister, Hafiz Jalandhari, who became poet laureate of Pakistan, Sheikh Abdullah, who became the ruler of Kashmir. So there was this atmosphere of pure passion, saying we've got to achieve independence, and giving their lives for it. My mother was a handpicked satyagrahi of Mahatma Gandhi and led the demonstrations in Dera Baba Nanak, which is our family hometown in Punjab, and was arrested by the British and imprisoned for it, even more so because she was British and fighting against the British. So these people were, and I said these people, I'm talking about a kind of movement that was happening. People that really sacrificed their lives for the country. And yet, my parents weren't the kind of idealists that did it for political reward. Even after independence, when many of them did reap the rewards of politics, my parents' idealism continued. My mother was working in the refugee camps in Kashmir, where all the refugees of the Kashmir war between India and Pakistan were gathered. My father helped write the constitution of Kashmir at the time, which gave land to the tillers. Even after they left Kashmir, that ideal, they changed completely, but their idealism didn't change. My mother became editor of Social Welfare, the government magazine. She discovered Buddhism, went on to become the highest Buddhist nun in the world. My father had his epiphanies. He became a New Age philosopher in Italy. I'm saying this all in brief because I possibly can't give you all the wonderful nuances and conflicts of that led to that decision. But these were people that, even though their methods changed, their causes changed, but the idealism within them remained constant. So what I learned from them was, firstly, the power and ability to transform your life, and secondly, that even though you transform, remain true to your essential being. That essence must not change. That belief in yourself and your values must not change. The outer forms can change, the expressions can change, but in all your transitions, be true to your inner self.
When you talk about your parents, and let me ask you a hypothetical question. You've, done a number of different things in your life. You've got a number of awards and everything. Which one do you think would your parents have felt really proud of all the things that you have achieved?
Well, obviously I can say the stardom in Italy, being knighted by the Italians, the kind of success that they saw. But given who they were, I think they'd be most proud of the things I do at a philanthropic level. There's a charity called Care and Share Italia, which takes slum children in Andhra and Telangana from the slums, looks after them, educates them, all the way from kindergarten to university, taking care of all their needs. I find that very gratifying to transform the lives of poor children this way. And through Italy, because I've always tried to use my relationship with Italy to further Indo-Italian understanding. The other is Sight Savers India, which again has given millions of people in India the gift of sight. And I don't say millions in a metaphorical way. They performed over 5 million surgeries free of cost in 108 districts in India. So Sight Savers, again, is a cause that I believe in. I ask people to support them here in the same way that I ask people in Italy to support Care and Share. So I think my parents would be most proud of those acts of reaching out for the benefit of humanity, above all my worldly success and acclaim.
Kabir, I want to take a minute to just welcome all the people who've joined us a little late. I will see a number of responses. Thank you for joining us. And I'm talking today to Kabir Bedi, who, as I said right in the beginning, I find it extremely hard to describe him just as an actor or an author, because, I really enjoyed reading his book, and there were a bunch of things that came up in my head. And why we are getting into this conversation is because what struck me was in my own book, Dreamers and Unicorns, I talk about the fact that you have to reinvent yourself every now and then. And when you start sort of climbing the stairs of success in one particular career, that's also the time when you need to start thinking about your next move. So in case of Kabir, I just found it really fascinating how you sort of really managed to move from stage, advertising stage, Bollywood, Hollywood, right through seamlessly.
Yes.
I'm going to talk to you about that.
Sure.
You were saying something. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think it's very important to reinvent yourself. As you see in my book and my life, I've done that a number of times. And the first thing to understand is there is such a thing as coming to the end of a road. Like when I had that experience in radio, I realized I do not want to work with these people. It's time to move on. Don't do the Robert Bruce try again business. The most successful people quit all the time, and they quit at the right time by leaving behind things that are wrong. So, or things that have outlived their utility, or things that are no longer serving them. So I'm not a big one on this keep trying. There is such a thing as um, uh, feeling that it's time to absolutely move on. And I experienced that both when I was working with All India Radio as a student at Stevens College in Delhi. Um, Also, when I was in advertising, I came to a point where I said, all right, I came here to learn filmmaking. I've learned filmmaking. If I have a choice. Either I stay in advertising and rise up the ranks and become an account director and hopefully the head of an agency, or I take my filmmaking skills and go somewhere where I can develop those. Because initially I came to Bombay to be a filmmaker. So it was time to leave advertising because I'd reached the ceiling of what I could achieve in film in advertising. Once that was clear, and fortunately, the fact that I did theatre with the great Alec Padamsee in Bombay gave me a wonderful platform. The play that I did of his called Tughlaq, Girish Karnad's first play in English, broke all theatre records in Bombay, and that led to a flood of offers, which was the second thing. It's called recognizing opportunity. I didn't say, no, I've come to become a director. They're offering me a job as an actor. I'll wait till I become a director. I thought, no, the opportunity is here to join the film industry. Join the film industry and then leverage your skills to become a director if that's what you want. I then joined it as an actor. As things happened, my journey as an actor continued. I didn't find the filmmaking opportunities or the films that I wanted to make. And then the Italians came to India looking for Sandokan. He had to be tall, athletic, bearded, and a professional actor. I happened to be all of the above. I still had to go and audition for it. Now, when they came to me, I was pretty well known in Bombay at the time. They said, you must come to Rome at your cost for an audition. I bristled. I said, I'm not some out-of-work actor who'll do what they say. How dare they ask me to come at my cost? But I saw the opportunity. I didn't let it slide. I didn't stand on ego. I said, I accept coming to Italy at my cost to do your audition. And I did, and it changed my life. So opportunity is a strange thing, you know. Opportunity doesn't always come with brass bands heralding its arrival. Opportunity can be a conversation overheard at a bus stop. Something somebody said that, my God, I could do that. And you follow that, it can change your life. So keep the antenna out to recognize opportunity that takes you in the direction that you want to go. Sometimes not even directly, indirectly. But that ability is essential as a part of your transformative process because it changes the ground you stand on. It changes your reality. It opens your doors to a new reality. When I was in Delhi, the other thing I realized was that crises are points of power. A crisis may not feel like it at the time because you think, oh my God, everything going wrong. I don't have any money. I'm out of a job. I've left these people. What can I do? What are my options? But the fact is, when you close doors behind you, other doors open. It's like a train going down a set of railway tracks. Normally, we are sort of on autopilot. Life just goes on. But there comes a point where there's a fork in the tracks. And at that point, you can either keep rolling down the same road, or you can say, wait a minute, there's a fork in the tracks. There's 3-4 ways I can go. Do I want to change tracks? Now, this change of tracks may take you out of your comfort zone because as much as we like change, the process of change is always a little painful or difficult or awkward. Mm-hmm. But if we want to change and at critical moments of crises and crossroads, push ourselves beyond the comfort zone to seek out another path, wonders can happen because you have seen the opportunity, you have realized that you can make that change, and the crisis that you thought was ruining your life is actually serving your life in the best possible way.
But, you know, some people would say you are a quitter because you quit advertising, then you quit Bollywood, then you quit Hollywood. Yeah. Are you a quitter?
No, I don't think of myself as a quitter. I made changes for good reasons. For good reasons. Like I said, some successful people have quit things all the time. When I went to Italy and had this incredible stardom, what was very clear to me was that despite my incredible stardom, I wasn't being inundated with film offers. So I mentioned this in my book, which you must read to get all the real juice and details. But
No,
a
no,
director said to me, he said,
but that's why I'm asking you this. It's lovely, very well written.
so this director said to me, he said, Kabir, we can't cast you. You're Sandokan. We make social films, we make comedies, we make our little dramas. We can't have Sandokan walking into the film and ruining it. You're indelibly Sandokan. So I thought, am I going to be a one-star wonder in the country of my greatest success? It depressed me enormously. Then it so happened that on that visit itself, I got an offer to play a very different kind of pirate, a film called The Black Pirate, which is a European character, and it was shot in South America. So I went with that. But I realized that I had to give Italy some time and distance before they were able to see me less as Sandokan and more as an actor. So I said, every actor in the world wants to go to Hollywood and make a success of Hollywood. So I set off for Hollywood and said, let's see what dekhi jao, dekhte ki honda hai. Hollywood ki hai ji. And of course, it wasn't as easy as I imagined at all, because in one sense, I had been lucky in India that I had done a play that got me film offers. Even luckier to go to Italy and become an instant superstar all over Europe. But Hollywood has a newcomer. I was auditioning against newcomers and actors that I looked up to, and there were no roles being written. And but then again, I said to myself, okay, so what's the opportunity here? They're not writing roles for Indians. They don't mind painting white actors brown. What can I play that they can't play? I said, okay, firstly, I'm not going to adopt the American accent. I'm going to play the foreigner out here. And I told my agent, I said, look for any roles that Hollywood thinks of as foreign. So the first big role I got was playing a Tuareg tribesman opposite Michael Caine in Ashanti. Now, I don't, by any shape or form, look like a Tuareg tribesman, but it was foreign enough for them to say, yes, yes, he's well known in Europe, he'll play a Tuareg tribesman. Then I got the James Bond film, Octopussy. There I was actually playing an Indian role because they needed a Sikh, they needed a strong, athletic man who could be somebody who can fight James Bond through the length of the film. And then the other great roles that I played, which got me worldwide fame, was in The Bold and Beautiful, where I played a Moroccan prince, Prince Omar. I'm not Moroccan, but it was foreign enough for Hollywood to say, cast him as a Moroccan. So I saw the opportunity of being the foreigner in Hollywood, and that's what I played. And that's what got me my biggest roles. Of course, Hollywood led to all kinds of other experiences, which I talk of in my book, but I'll delve into them only if you ask me specifically about them.
You know, when I hear you talk about your moving from Bollywood to Hollywood or any of them, every transition, for me, the takeaway when I was reading your book was that you've turned anything which would have been a challenge or a barrier, you've turned it into an advantage. I mean, so for example, in Hollywood, you were the outsider. All right, so you started playing outsider roles. In some sense, and I want to confirm this back with you, that your parents, they sort of, in some sense, rebelled against racism and all of that when they were getting married. Your mother was Brit. And
yes, absolutely. The registrar refused to shake hands with them. Yeah.
The
registrar at the Oxford Registry Office refused to shake hands with them. There were signs outside boarding houses saying no dogs, Indians or coloreds. It was a time of racism in Oxford, which you can't imagine, but it was true. And they would have done terrible things to my father. The Brits could be quite harsh, but the problem was that he was not only a national champion, hammer throw champion, but was also trained in wrestling by Gama. So the attempts to intimidate him with the great Gama, yeah. So the attempts to intimidate him physically ended up in great grief, and they just tried to put him down in other ways, snide comments, racist remarks, social boycotts, etc. But the fact is, they were rebels in their own way. And I've been a rebel all my life too. I've always challenged a lot of things in social conventions, in the life way that I've lived, in the way that my relationships have been conducted, and even in the choices of my careers, which are most unusual for most people.
When you look at your going into Hollywood, did you also face a similar kind of racism and treating you as a sort of minor actor, even though you were quite a star that time in when you went there? Was it easier for you because of Sandokan?
No, I wouldn't accuse Hollywood of overt racism in my case. There's no overt racism, but where it happens is that in those days diversity was not an issue. So roles just weren't written for Indians. Now, if nobody's writing roles for Indians, what roles are you going to get? Today, when Priyanka Chopra is there, when Irfan Khan goes there, when Upam Kher goes there are roles being written for Indians. Diversity has become an issue. And I'm glad that, we made a lot of noise at the time. And as Priyanka Chopra said, he paved the way for Indian actors to explore their talent globally and has lived life to the full. So those were the acts of a rebel going off into this unknown territory, taking unseemly risks, risking everything, all your finances, all your built relationships that you leave behind, all your fans, all those things. And then, to complete my story, I did come back to Italy with a number of miniseries for Italian television, plus few films, but I had to give it that gap. So moving on was an act of not rejection, but of renewal, and in some cases coming back to revisit the old territory from a point of strength. So when I was called back to India from Hollywood, I was called back to do Khoon Bhari Maang as the hero opposite Rekha. And that was one of my biggest successes ever in India. So change and moving on and reinventing yourself is very, very important and can lead to huge results. But change is also not just a question of opportunities and moving on, etc. There are inner battles that we have to fight to be able to make those changes. Within us, there are all kinds of people. You and I, everyone has the capacity to be a saint or a murderer, a prime minister or a prostitute. It's those aspects of us are in all of us. And within each person, there are certain personalities that are there. There's your pleasure-loving self that doesn't give a damn about anything else. It just wants you to have a good time. There's your ambitious self that wants to work at no matter what it takes, price it extracts in terms of your personal relationships. There's your romantic side that, even if you're in the driest profession, you love to sing, you love to read, you love to create. There are creative sides within us. There are all kinds of sides. And I see these sides of us almost like ministers round a table. The question you have to decide is, who is the prime minister? Which self within yourself are you empowering? Who's in charge? Is it your pleasure-loving side that doesn't give a damn about whether you get on in life as long as it's having a good time right now, or whether you empower your ambitious side that doesn't give a damn about many things, but just wants to get ahead and prove things to other people, get more fame, get more power, get more money. All these are selves. Empowering the right self within us is also a very important key to transformation and growth in life. And also, time is one of our biggest resources. We give it away too freely. Somebody says, "Chalo yaar, idhar chalte hain." No, there's nothing wrong. Have a good time. You have a good time. But people make demands on your time, and you give it away freely because you don't give your time enough value. Time is the currency you have to make all the changes that you need to make. It happens when you put in the work, when you put in the time, when you actually follow through on your ideas. Otherwise, an idea is no more than the size of the cell that it occupies in your brain. An idea has to be actioned in ways that take time, energy, and effort. And if you don't protect your time, you'll never get down to it because time is all you have. So protecting time is also very important to transformation. And being, I won't say ruthless, but being very careful with your time. Not have a good time, go to see movies, hang out with your yards, have a lovely party, but that can't be the sum total of your time because you will stagnate. And the worst thing in life is stagnation. The worst thing in life is to stagnate.
How do you spend your time today? What's your typical day like?
What's my day like?
Do you have a flex routine? Do you sort of have a really structured time, or it's a combination? How do you?
You know, in the life of an actor, there's constant change. If you're shooting, your schedules are different. If you're not shooting, your schedules are very different. And I've changed. What got this book written is the fact that I changed a lot of things about me. I used to spend a lot of time watching the news in the evening. I used to spend a lot of time reading newspapers in the morning. With the beginning of the pandemic and my becoming clear as to how I wanted to tell my story, that is a story in itself as to how I finally understood how I should tell my story. Once I was clear, I started rising at 5 in the morning, making myself 2 cups of tea, sitting down at the computer, not reading papers, discontinued my papers. Put in 5 hours of solid writing before I even went to breakfast, came back, wrote like a maniac again, and then I carried on till literally it was time for the evening news. Then I stopped. And then I allowed myself ways of relaxation that I like, whether it's to have a drink or to chill in some way, or generally take my mind off what I'd done all day, which is also a very important aspect of renewing your creativity. So that change of routine freed up time, freed up energy, freed up my focus to get done. Very few people believe that I wrote this book in 6 months. At least the first draft I hammered out in 6 months. Many people thought I'd worked on it for years. And in a sense, I had thought about it for years. But the actual work, and then it took me another 3 months of refining, polishing, getting feedback from a few very trusted friends that I reached out to for advice. But it's amazing that my book was written in the pandemic, has been released in the middle of a raging pandemic with all the dangers that that has and all the difficulties that has in marketing a book. But it's out there. And I've been blessed with wonderful reviews, absolutely breathtaking reviews. So I'm most grateful. And this is just another example of the ability to transform by making changes that allow that transformation. Because
I also think that
you can't put something in a cup unless you empty out what was in the cup before. So you have to create the space to allow new ideas, new energies, new visions, new destinations to emerge in your life. And renewing is very important. Stagnation is the worst thing in the world.
Are you a better actor or a better writer? How do you judge yourself?
I'm not going to answer that. I'll let people decide that. Because if I say one, I damn the other. So let people decide.
Okay. I want to sort of switch and say that when you've gone through a series of, from a corporate job to being a freelancer, a motivational speaker, all of that which you are sort of doing today. When you look at that, do you see that you want to write more? Do you see you want to act more? Do you want to do more time with charity? What is it that you would ideally want to do if you had a choice? Or
Well,
all of the above?
I certainly absolutely passionately loved the process of writing. I certainly enjoyed that enormously. It gave me great creative satisfaction. Also, it was cathartic for me to tell my stories with such honesty and just let the chips fall where they may. This is what happened. This is the truth, my truth. You don't get that. It's the same kind of satisfaction when you're acting because you're doing a role written by somebody else and performing, etc. You get great satisfaction when a role is successful, when you've done it in a wonderful way. But for me, writing has certainly been very successful. And also, the philanthropic things I do also give me enormous satisfaction. But I would say that at this stage, I don't have to choose. I can do all three because acting happens when it happens, writing happens whenever I want it to happen, and philanthropy continues all the time.
I'm going to sort of talk to you about your. Is it true that when you want to become an actor, only those people who are very fond of books, who read a lot, can find it easier to write a book? Is that true? I mean, you certainly. Um, I know you read a lot of newspapers and all that you were saying, but you also read a number of books and all that. Is that something you enjoy doing?
Yes, I read books. I read books. I find reading books very important because it's like having a conversation with a fine mind. And in my earlier years, I did my reading of the classics, etc. But let me say, before I talk about books that I recommend, let me just say that I found that Dreamers and Unicorns is a fantastic book. It is a book that is filled with insights and information, with a deep understanding of the changing world and a clear-eyed vision of what the future holds. It is beautifully written, immaculately researched, and I think it deserves to be on the international bestseller list. So, congratulations.
Wow. Thank you. That was how nice of you to say that. And thanks, Scott. Did you actually? I mean, did you? I mean, do you have?
I read key parts of it, and I speed read some parts of it because not all of it applies to my life. But
sure.
The whole new world and techies are part of my existence. My son was a techie. I've dedicated my book to techies and all young professionals. That's the dedication of my book. So sure. These are people I care about immensely. The tech world is something I have followed very closely. But I read a lot of your book, enough to know that what I said about it is absolutely heartfelt and true. So I'm absolutely delighted that that you wrote such a wonderful book, and I've gained a lot from it. So let me say, if I was to recommend books, I'd of course recommend, apart from your book and my own book, I would go into the classics and say, among the classics, I'd say Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky is one of the great books. But I read books also for great enjoyment and for learning more about the universe in which I live. And I think a book called A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson is an absolutely magical book that should be read by everybody. I also love the spy genre, the John le Carré kind of books, but the best book that I've read in the spy genre is a thing called The Spy and the Traitor by Ben McIntyre. And I really recommend that heartily. Of course, I read a lot of books, page-turning books, for the information that they have in them, not for enormous Salman Rushdie-like literary excellence. And so I also like the Dan Browns. I also like India's answer to Dan Brown, Ashwin Sanghi. I also love the tales of India that Amish Tripathi has written and reinvented the classics. So these are books that I read for enjoyment, and I must say, among them, I must come back to the fact that I really admired your book too, Dreamers and Unicorns.
You actually have it. How nice of
I have it with me. Absolutely.
If you think about your own career, is there a skill that you have which you think has been underutilized? I mean, you're really good at it, but not enough people have utilized that. What would that be? Untapped potential.
This is one of the first talks where I'm actually talking about the lessons implicit in my book. So I have the skill to explain the lessons in my book, which are implicit in my book. I have the skill to explain it explicitly, that I've just done, but it's a skill that I have not leveraged so far.
But you should. I mean, you're really good at storytelling.
Thank you.
Talking of which, what are some of the skills that if somebody wants to sort of be a professional storyteller or just maybe improve as a storyteller, what are some of those skills that people need to build, and how do you go about building those?
Firstly, I think it's important to have a good sense of what a story is. Secondly, know that your story is interesting and tell it as interestingly as you can. And above all, be true only to what tells that story. Don't get carried away into extraneous details and names and places and events and happenings that may be very interesting to you, but are not central to the story. So be clear what the story is. Is it interesting? Tell it as interestingly as possible. Cut out everything else that takes away from the story, no matter how interesting it seems.
It sort of reminds me of the quote of a very famous sculptor. It's often attributed to Michelangelo, who said that you take a block of marble and then remove everything which is not the statue. So
precisely. He said it much better than I could possibly say. Much better than I could possibly say. But that's the thinking of a master. Simplify things. Simplify. I don't believe in big words that you have to look up dictionaries for. I believe in telling it as simply and elegantly and evocatively as possible, because what I've told is the emotional story of my life and the emotions I experienced at all these incredible turning points of triumphs and tragedies and milestones and mistakes and regrets and remembrances. All these I have shared in my book. I've given you a kind of overview of some chapters, but I can't possibly give you the experience of going through it all the way I've tried to do in my book. Stories on a story.
And which also, I just thought that usually when people write, their own biography, autobiographies are notorious for being sort of sugar-coated. They only talk about all what is great, all the things that was perfect. And they keep saying, I'm not perfect, but they actually portray themselves as completely perfect, without flaws. Your book actually goes to the other end of the scale. You kind of, in many ways, you've been brutally honest. You've been very candid. And in some sense, you bared your soul. Do you really expect to have the reader to understand you in a completely different light because of the way you've written now? What was in your mind when you wrote about this?
I think so, because I had a choice. Either I wrote my story or I didn't. And the other choice was, if I told my story, Was I going to sugarcoat and tell people what a great man I was, what great achievements I had, what wonderful relationships I had, and everything was hunky-dory, and or was I going to tell the truth? The ups and downs, the rises and falls, the suicides, the bankruptcies, whatever that I've explored in my book. These are things that I chose to tell deliberately because I felt that if I didn't tell my story, who would? And if I didn't tell it the way I saw it, my truth, then that story would never be told. And I wanted my story to be told, and I wanted to tell it. That's why I've called it Stories I Must Tell.
There is pretty interesting. One of the comments that somebody has put there is saying that you're being very authentic and honest right here, right now as well. And so
Thank
that's, so that's
Thank
something
you.
that.
Thank you.
There's an interesting question come from Abba who says that, when you think about the bold and experimental generation of the 70s, and you look at the bold and experimental generation today, 2021, what is the difference?
Well, I think it's a very different time in the 70s. In the 70s, even living together, the fact that Prathama and I lived together was the headline in newspaper articles. They lived together, and but we pushed the envelope a lot. I mean, Prathama went and streaked and became India's first streaker and caused a sensation. We ended up with an open marriage, which is also would be scandalous even today, I guess. But I feel today's generation belongs to a very different generation. They are not quite so hidebound by the ideas of their parents or the need for conventional conformity. They are also more fluid in their relationships. They are not, it's very hard to generalize because there's always so many exceptions, but they are a more open generation, open to ideas, open to experimentation, breaking of role models. None of this, gender stereotypes, the woman is the inferior one and the man is the superior one. All that is being left behind. And I can't fully speak for today's generation because I'm not part of them. But I do know that they are pushing the envelopes in a number of ways that would have made us proud even in my generation.
Brilliant. We are sort of coming up towards the end of the conversation. I want to sort of go back and ask you that when you look at your career graph, right from the time when you were sort of a reporter with All India Radio and then finally the superstar and now an author, sort of lots of ups and downs when you look at it. What would you say was the pinnacle?
The pinnacle.
If one plot your career on a graph, what would the pinnacle be?
I'm the eternal optimist. For me, the best is always yet to come. And so I always look forward to an even more glorious future. But certainly in terms of public recognition and the number of people that I affected and the kind of success that I saw, which was like Beatlemania all over again, was Europe. So there's no question that Europe has to be considered a pinnacle of sorts. But by the same token, I was the first actor that went from Bollywood and actually made a career in Hollywood. And if you see my journey as that of a middle-class Delhi boy who went on to become a major star in Europe with a career in Hollywood and Bollywood, it's not been a bad journey. In fact, it's been one hell of a ride. And it's been as I described in my book, a tumultuous roller coaster ride thrilling, and at times equally satisfying.
Oh, I would totally agree with that. I mean, it's just quite incredible. I would, when I was looking at some of the photographs that you've got in the book, and fabulous set of photographs, by the way. One of the things I thought was you opened the book with the story about the Beatles, which was obviously I'm also a Beatles fan. And Beatles used to get this kind of crazy, fan following wherever they went. And when I look at some of those pictures of you in Italy and all of that, I mean, it was like getting mobbed all the time, all the time,
Yeah.
all the time. And it was like that was a one-person equivalent of the Beatles in many ways. You got the
It
and
was,
then
yeah.
you give it all up, and you walk away from all of that. Do you regret it sometimes? Do you think that maybe I should have hung on for another year or so?
It's like you mentioned, it's a strange irony that this cub reporter that interviews his idols, the Beatles, ends up 10 years later getting the same kind of adulation in Europe. I didn't leave Italy because I walked away from it. I left Italy because I realized I was too identified with a character, and I pushed the envelope and went on to Hollywood, because that's where every actor in commercial films wants to go and make a success of it. And there I had my share of successes and failures, but I was a working actor. I did have a career there. And my sense is that, the journey goes on. Even when you're down, you lift yourself up and resurrect yourself. That again is part of the joys and sorrows of life. And when I'm writing a book that gets the reviews that it's got today from virtually every single reviewer, it's another high altogether. It's another high altogether. It's as high, it's the same high that I had when I did Sandokan. So there are different highs at different points in life that give you equally deep satisfactions. And I'm glad to have lived many lifetimes in one life.
I would totally agree with that. I mean, your book certainly gives one the feeling that here is a person who's sort of packed in 10 different characters into one human being. So, and that to me is Kabir Bedi.
Thank you.
What would you say would be, my last question for you is, if you had to sort of describe your motto, life's motto, something that inspires you or the way that you think about it, in 3 or 4 words. 4 words. Okay, let's do that. 4 words, what would be your motto?
It has to be 6 words. The best is yet to come.
Okay.
That's the motto that drives me and has driven me from one continent to the other, from one profession to another, from one success to another, eventually to writing a book that has given me enormous satisfaction. And I still believe the best is yet to come.
I have no doubt, that the future is going to be even brighter for you, and wish you a lot more books. I've really enjoyed reading your book. And
Thank you, Abhijit.
Thank you so very much. You've done a fabulous job of putting together, a biography, which for once is not just, the sum total of what a great person I am, but it's a very, very candid, sometimes even tough look at your own self. And it takes a lot of courage to be able to do that. So brilliant book. I loved it. And thank you so very much. I want to
Thank
really
you. Thank you. I hope
say
people
that
read it. I hope.
Super fun conversation. I'm sure people will read it. And, I certainly have it right there behind me. I've kept it there on my shelf, and I've really enjoyed reading it. Thank you so very
Abhijit,
much
for this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. I've greatly enjoyed talking to you. And thank you for your appreciation, the support you've given me and my book, and for talking to all the million people who follow you about my journey. And as an author, I salute the book you have written, because it is equally profound in many ways and will also help many lives to transform, change, and evolve into something better. So congratulations to that too.
Thank you. How generous of you to say that. Thank you so much, Kabir. It was lovely. Thanks a lot, listeners, viewers. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks for all your comments. The ones we have not been able to sort of address here, we are going to go back and, we are going to address all of them. So just don't go away. So we are going to see you there. And I have a feeling that we are going to have Kabir back on another conversation. So just stay tuned about that. And that's going to be on a different kind of a platform, which is just suited for that amazing voice of Kabir Bedi. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Good night.
Thank you and good night.
Bye.